Part 7, Chapter 13. The Black Hawk swept in low over the treetops, its side-mounted searchlights startling deer and getting annoyed looks from foxes, its rotors spinning up sand as it entered the flatlands. Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes was standing behind the pilot, Clint McKellar, as they flew over the park at a cruising speed of 150 miles an hour. There was no need to go slowly. It wasn't as if the B-3 would be easy to miss. And he didn't miss it. Off to the northeast, the spotlight played across the black wing of the plane, jutting at an ugly angle from the sand. "Hold it," Rhodes said. "Come back." "I saw it," said McKellar. The pilot pushed the control stick gently towards the wreckage, at the same time spiraling down. The props blew the golden sand from the fuselage. Rhodes' heart swelled when he saw that the hatches had been blown, which meant that at least the pilots had gotten free of the aircraft and were probably all right. He turned to Lieutenants Bill Kelly, Don Reed, and Pat Thomas, who were sitting in the spacious cabin. "We've found it," he said. "Anything, Pat?" Young Pat Thomas looked at the Geiger counter resting beside him on the bench. He nodded about as slow as he chewed his gum. "No, sir. Only a faint background glow from the old mines. Otherwise, no radiation." Rhodes offered a silent prayer of thanksgiving, then radioed Colonel Wilkins from the cockpit with the news. "Great," Wilkins said. "A lot of people here are going to breathe easier when I tell them that." Less than 2 minutes later, the helicopter had settled into the sands fewer than 100 yards from the B-3. The 4 officers had donned helmets with windshields to protect them from the spinning sand and were approaching the plane single file at a jog. Rhodes was in the lead, his flashlight picking out areas the chopper spotlights missed. "Colonel Wilkins, do you copy?" Rhodes yelled into his helmet microphone. "I copy," Wilkins replied. "What's it look like?" "Well, she didn't come apart in flight, that's for sure," he said. "Crashed whole. Can't see one wing. The other's bent up, maybe even severed. Can't tell from here." Rhodes motioned the other men towards the bomb bay while he went to the cockpit. He shined his light from one side to the other. "Wilkins, the cockpit's empty," he reported. "And the seats are gone. My men are checking the payload now. I'm going to join them." "Copy that," Wilkins said. Rhodes had to fight from being blown sideways as he walked along the dented side of the aircraft. It is strange, he thought, how in death a person seems so pathetically frail, while a plane like this retains traces of its dignity. Maybe because the ultimate strength of humans is in the soul, he thought, and not in their lines or carriage. The big smooth fuselage was tilted slightly to one side, like a beached blue whale. The right bomb bay door was exposed, and the men had been pulling it open by hand. They had opened it nearly a foot when Rhodes arrived. "We'll have it in another minute or so," Reed called back to him. Rhodes shouted, "No! That's enough!" It wasn't important that they actually get inside. He just wanted to make absolutely sure that the bombs were secure. The men stepped back as Rhodes walked over. Dropping to his knees under the fuselage and leaning to the right, Rhodes shined the flashlight inside. His eyes widened as the beam roamed back to front along the empty racks. Not believing what he didn't see, Rhodes pulled off his helmet and squirmed the top half of his torso and one arm inside. Thinking that maybe the bombs had been shaken loose, he shined the light around the bomb bay. They hadn't been knocked free. They were gone. Rhodes ducked out and pulled his helmet back on. "Colonel!" he shouted into the microphone. "I'm here, Sam." "Forget about breathing easier," Rhodes said. "I'm afraid we've got ourselves a broken arrow." Chapter 14. Still sitting in the Situation Room, with fewer people but more empty coffee cups, Mason Baird looked at Joint Chiefs Chairman Dreyfus. Like Schneider, Creeley, and 6 aides, the men were wearing headphones plugged into jacks underneath the conference table. They had been listening to the communications between Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes and McMurran. Baird doffed his headset. "Broken arrow?" he asked Dreyfus. The chairman said matter-of-factly, "That's what we call it when we lose a nuclear weapon." "Oh, Jesus," Baird said. He rolled his lips together and shook his head. "I don't know what's scarier, losing nuclear weapons or the fact that it happens so often you people have a term for it." Schneider said, "The terms were created for the war simulations. This only happened once before. Remember the Greek cruise ship which went down in August 1991? "I can't say I do," Baird said. "Or maybe I'm just blanking because I'm in a state of shock." "Well, the SEALs did that. The ship was transporting a stolen nuke to South Africa. Hell, that's why the crew abandoned ship before the passengers did. Caught hell for it later too. Didn't want to get their stones fried." He chuckled. "That's why the South African Air Force rescued so many of the people. They wanted to get them the hell out of there so they could try to salvage the goddamn nuke." Baird shuddered, now because of the way that had amused Schneider. These guys played too many war games, he decided. To them, it was all a big Dr. Strangelove role-playing game. "What do you think?" Dreyfus asked Creeley. "Software malfunction and accidental discharge?" "It's certainly possible," General Creeley replied. "Improper debugging. Or it could be a radiation leak that affected the..." Wilkins's voice in the earphones cut the conversation short. "Sam, Colonel Marrow and I agree that you should go back and look for the nukes, but keep the counter near you. If those eggs hit rock, they could have cracked." "Understood." "Your Geigers pick up more rads than you'd get off a toaster oven," Wilkins warned. "And I want you out of there. I'm ordering in gunships for support, just in case anything funny's going on." "I copy," Rhodes said. "We'll take off and start back along the flight path. I'll be in touch." "Remember what I said, Sam." "I will, Colonel," Rhodes replied. Baird shook his head again as he thought back to the last thing Dreyfus and Creeley had been saying. "Let me get this straight," the White House Chief of Staff said. 2 nuclear bombs dropped from a plane, but they didn't go off. Does that mean our bombs don't work either?" "What do you mean either?" Schneider said, sitting up in his chair. "Well, the plane. We don't know why the B-3 went down," the general said. In his last transmission, Major Deakin said that Captain Hale lost control of the aircraft. It's possible one of them activated the weapons release system in confusion. "You do train these pilots, I trust?" Baird asked. "They're the best in the world," General Creeley said indignantly. "But believe me, Mr. Baird, when you're in a 10-ton plane auguring in at Mach 1, you start pushing every button in sight." Creeley rubbed the bridge of his nose. Not that I want to pass judgment before we have the facts. For all we know, the B3 was FOD'd, in which case it's an act of God, not a screw-up. Dreyfus added, and even if it wasn't a bird that knocked it down, the fact is, as long as there are pilots, planes are going to crash. Baird felt as if he'd been mugged, first by his own man, Giles, and now by the other side. He tried to remember what the hell it was that ever made him leave small-town politics anyway. To answer your question, Mr. Baird, said Creeley, his voice even. This doesn't mean our bombs don't work. On the contrary, it means they do. They're designed to survive crashes intact. They can lie in a pool of burning jet fuel for 5 hours without any problem. Schneider folded his arms beneath a take that look, a last kick while Baird was down. It's only a matter of time before we find the warheads, Creeley continued. When we do, you'll be impressed, I think, at how efficiently we implement our simulation scenarios. Baird nodded, drained his coffee cup, and obviously disappointed Schneider by saying nothing. Privately, he hoped Creeley was correct. He'd be happy to eat Kroburgers and not have to tell the president that a couple of nuclear bombs were missing. But while he hoped it, 20-plus years of acting on gut feelings that were usually correct told him not to heat up the skillet just yet.